So hello to my listeners, Sherry Forsyth, a peak performance coach. And this month we're doing a theme on invisible illnesses. In other words, when people are very ill and yet they don't look sick. So we're trying to raise awareness on for people who are our friends and family so they can understand what we are going through, and also just to raise awareness of the variety of particularly autoimmune diseases that seems to be hugely on the increase. So I welcome today Joanne Fenter from the UK in Cambridge, and Jo happens to be my sister-in-law as well. So Jo, let's start off, I think, with you telling us what you were diagnosed with and what the disease really is.
Okay, so I was diagnosed with polymyalgia rheumatica 15 months ago, and it's a disease quite similar to rheumatoid arthritis in that your movement is severely impaired unless you're on medication, but it's not like rheumatoid arthritis in that it's not degenerative, and you can have it for 1 year, you can have it for 15 years, just depending on how your body responds to the medication. But it's really a disease that affects your movement. Okay,
and why does it affect your movement? Is it stiffness? Is it inflammation? Is it?
It's inflammation. So the tests you have to do for it are the ESR and CRP test, which test your inflammation in your blood. And the normal is about 0.6 or 19, and mine was 89, 90, getting dangerously close. So yeah, it's basically inflammation. Most people feel it in their shoulders, but a lot of people feel it in their pelvic girdle. And I felt it particularly in the beginning in my knees. And I thought it was because I'd done too much exercise on a new exercise bike.
Okay. Okay. And so what were the first signs? Were there any signs that kind of made you think, oh, things are not so great? And what were they?
So my sister's a doctor, and when I told her I was very, very stiff, she said, oh, it's probably from the exercise bike, just get back on it again. And after a couple of weeks, I went to my doctor because I couldn't roll over in bed. I couldn't get out of bed without my husband pulling me out of bed. I couldn't shower because I couldn't bend down. I couldn't get dressed. And to walk, I could only shuffle. So, you know, I was off work and my movement was absolutely horrible. And any movement caused incredible pain in my body. And I was very, very tired as well.
Okay, so obviously because the body is fighting something, that often is what makes us tired. So your body was fighting.
Yes.
So then you went to the doctor and obviously were diagnosed. How were you diagnosed?
Well, first of all, I went to the doctor and she said, you've got a neck spasm, and she put me on Nurofen. Then I went back a week later and she put me on naproxen, which is a stronger anti-inflammatory, and I still didn't get better. So I thought, well, it must be something to do with the exercise. So I went to see a physiotherapist who checked me over, and he said, you have got serious bursitis, which is inflammation of certain parts of your body. He said, you need to have blood tests immediately. So I went back to my doctor and she did the blood tests, and she phoned me as soon as she got the results. She said, oh, I'm so sorry that I didn't pick this up earlier. You've got polymyalgia rheumatica. All the signs are pointing to it. And so then I started on a dose of steroids. I think I started at 15 milligrams, and you're supposed to taper. As you get better, you're supposed to taper 1 milligram down every month. And I did that for a year, but after a year, the steroids weren't being effective. So then they put you on a drug called methotrexate, which is apparently a cancer drug, but we're on a very low dose. So I started on 15 milligrams of that. And after 3 months, there wasn't very much improvement. So I'm now going up to 25 milligrams. And so far, it's helped a lot more than the steroids did. But yes, there are side effects to methotrexate, which I'll maybe talk about later.
Okay, well, let's do it. Go if you'd like to go into it now. What kind of side effects you've had on?
So for the steroids, sorry,
the methotrexate. How long was it from the first symptoms to when you were finally diagnosed with polymyalgia?
Probably about a month.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So I was off work. I was off work all that time. I couldn't work at all. So the side effects are for steroids particularly is weight gain, fatigue, and you've got a suppressed immune system. So you have to be very careful not to be close to anyone who's got colds or flu or anything like that. You have to look after your hygiene much more strenuously, you know, washing the surfaces and doing that sort of thing. I've had the disease for 15 months and I've put on 17 kgs on the steroids in spite of good eating habits. It's very hard not to lose, to lose weight. And obviously my face has got quite fat. And so people say, oh, you look so well, Joanne. And yet it's the steroids, but inside, you've got that terrible fatigue all the time. And obviously the methotrexate, there is hair loss and nausea, but I haven't, because I've been on a lower dose, I haven't experienced those, but I have experienced the fatigue. So yeah.
Which, I mean,
those are basically
fatigue comes with a lot of the autoimmune diseases.
Yes.
And it's not measurable and it's not seen. And that is what is so difficult for people to understand. That even though you are looking so well, in fact, you're exhausted, you're in a lot of pain, you're suffering from inflammation or nausea, whatever it may be. And so, so the side effects of a lot of the inflammatory diseases can be from the medication of the inflammatory diseases.
Yes.
It can actually be quite daunting. So what has helped you to cope with this illness?
So Sherry, I'm in quite a responsible position at my work, and this disease normally affects retired people. It normally affects people over 70. So to be in my 50s and have this disease is quite unusual. So after I'd read up about the disease, I went to the trustees of the school, and they've been really kind to me and said, look, if you're tired in the afternoon, you have to go home to rest. I have to prioritize things at work. I have to delegate a lot more. I do things like online shopping now. I don't do housework as much as I used to because I just really haven't got the energy. When I do have energy, I do housework. So it's been quite difficult to lead a normal life. I don't often go out in the evenings. In fact, I rarely go out in the evenings now. And at the weekend, I spend most of it resting in bed a lot of the time because that helps. But just pottering around the house sometimes, but not doing anything that's really going to make me tired.
And Jo, do you think stress had any played any role in the causing of this illness? From what
they say, they say it's caused by a virus. They think it's caused by a virus initially, but I think stress does play a major part. And my husband Mark has had chronic fatigue and chronic migraines for 3 years, and I think caring for him over 2 years, plus my difficult job, plus having to do most of the chores in the house and everything at the same time, I think that played a huge part in it. It's very hard to care for someone and to do a full-time job and everything. So I think, and I think watching my husband in pain also caused me a lot of stress because there was nothing I could do. I felt impotent to help him. So yes, I do think stress played a major part in it, indeed.
Okay, so you've mentioned that you're in a difficult job. You're trying to balance all these roles that you play. How have you managed to do that?
With difficulty. I think with difficulty. I think I know with Mark and his ME, one of the things he has to do is manage his illness, and he's got to be quite strict with himself. So when he's tired, he has to go to bed, and I'm the same. If I'm tired at work, I have to go to bed. You're tired a lot, but I think exercise helps, but I can't do prolonged exercise. I used to be able to go for a run for half an hour or cycle, but now I do short bursts of exercise, sort of based on Pilates, yoga exercises, and apparently walking and swimming is very good for polymyalgia rheumatica. The other thing is going on a low inflammatory diet, which means gluten-free, sometimes dairy-free, but definitely sugar-free. That's the way that, you know, you have to try and look after yourself as much as possible. It's difficult in this age of sugarholics like myself, but yeah, you have to be, you make a choice, don't you? You either are inflamed or you enjoy a piece of cake. So, you know, it's getting the balance right, I think, with that.
So you've spoken about what it is, what polymyalgia is, but what are the greatest challenges you have with this illness?
Well, I think what I spoke about already, I think the weight gain, I think the tiredness, the medication, trying to get the medication right is difficult. And I just want to mention here that polymyalgia is linked to giant cell arteritis. And in the UK, they're really trying to warn doctors about giant cell arteritis because you can go blind overnight. And so it has to be a very quick diagnosis if you're feeling any of the symptoms that I spoke about earlier. And we've got a support group here called PMRGCA UK, and we have a support group every month that I go to. Everybody in that group is over 70. I think there are two of us in our 50s, one of whom is also still trying to work. But that support group has really helped. And Kate Gilbert, who had polymyalgia for a long time, she wrote a book, which I read right in the beginning, and it's very, very good at outlining you know, your lack of movement. I can't put on my stockings in the morning very easily. I can't always bend down easily. Sometimes it affects my walking, and I certainly can't do more than 15-minute stretches of exercise. It's just too much for me. And then I start to get fluey and coldy. So I keep my exercise very limited to when I feel I can, and I often do physio type exercises on my bed.
So just for listeners out there who might also be suffering from polymyalgia rheumatica, the author is Kate Gilbert, and what's the name of her book?
I think it's just called Polymyalgia and Giant Cell Arteritis.
Okay, and
she had
is it A-R-T-E? Arteritis.
Yes, A-R-T-E-R-I-S. Yes.
Okay, so you're not just saying arthritis in a funny way.
No, no, it's definitely arteritis. Yes, I was also quite confused in the beginning. Yeah, and that is really a serious disease. And one of the men in our support group actually went blind because he wasn't diagnosed quickly enough. So if anyone is out there who suddenly your movement is impeded severely, you need to have blood tests as soon as possible, and particularly the CRP, don't ask me what it stands for, and ESR need to be checked very, very quickly indeed. And those people would need to go on a very high dose of steroids, like about 60 milligrams to 80 milligrams. So,
Joe, this chap who went blind because of the arteritis, is that permanent or is it just a temporary?
Yes, it's permanent.
Wow.
Yes. And a lot of people in England were going blind because the GCA, giant cell arteritis, wasn't picked up quickly enough. And so now there's a very good rheumatologist in London who's really campaigning for this, and he's sent information around to all the doctors so that if we present with any of those symptoms, that we are tested really, really quickly to prevent that.
So are the two illnesses related? Does the one come before the other? If you get one,
you can have both. You can have both together, or you can have either the GCA or the PMR. So a lady in our group has only GCA. She had the same symptoms as I did, except you also, for GCA, you have a temporal headache, and your vision might go a little weird. And so when the man in our group went to an optometrist, they couldn't find anything wrong. He went to the doctor, they couldn't find anything wrong. And they said, oh, just go home and rest. And the next day he woke up blind. So it really is quite a scary illness, actually.
Sure, that's actually quite upsetting to know that you could see one day and then the next day it's not like your vision gradually gets blurred. It's so immediate.
Yeah. Yes.
Because the nerves are being affected by the illness, your optic nerve. Or
possibly, I'm not sure. I think Kate speaks a little bit more about that in her book, which I read a year ago, so I can't remember everything. But yes, they do a test, I think, something to do with your optic nerve, yes. Mm.
Okay, sure. So what have you really changed in your life? You've mentioned a few things as we've been going along, but what are the major things that you've changed as a result of being ill?
So I think rest. And that means I come home from work, I go and lie down on the bed immediately before I do anything else. If I'm tired at work, I leave and I come home and rest. I think it sounds strange, but batch cooking helps, because one of the things you don't feel like when you get home, you just don't want to be on your feet. Is the last thing you want to do is cook. And with my husband ill as well, we have to do batch cooking, and we both help each other prepare food in the kitchen. As I spoke about earlier, the exercise, I think less exercise but more often. And I think eating sensibly. I mean, I tried it out for a week. I tried giving up sugar completely for a week, and I felt no fatigue in that time. So although we all love our sugar, it really is important not to eat sugar. And I think the other changes are, and I'm lucky in that I'm not really a socialite, but my husband and I don't go out at night. At the weekend, we rest as much as possible, and that suits him with his illness. It suits me. So I think that's probably a change as well. I rarely socialize anymore, sadly, except at work.
Sure. Talking about sugar, there's a book which I haven't read and I'm still desperate to read it, apparently about sugar, called The White Poison.
Oh, yeah.
You know, sugar has been found to be at the base. It's not the cause of, but related to developing illnesses like obviously sugar diabetes, but also a lot of autoimmune things, including Parkinson's, dementia, and Alzheimer's. Sugar tends to wreak havoc in our bodies, actually. And I think many people are addicted to sugar because as a child, what do we have? We have those cereals that are packed with sugar. We have drinks that are packed with sugar. And yeah, you know, my husband and I, in fact, we never have sugar. Every once in a while, I'll have a little bit of chocolate because I keep on saying I need to have my serotonin levels. But yeah, you know, we have actually very little dairy, very little sugar. Mike has no gluten. So diet does play a big role, and especially those foods that are anti-inflammatory. So from the research you've done, what kind of foods are important as anti-inflammatory agents that you can remember?
So I changed from white potatoes to sweet potatoes. That's better for you. You have to eat a lot of vegetables. Reduce your fruit to only 4 pieces of fruit a day. You know, when you give up sugar, initially you want to eat a lot of fruit, but try to eat as little fruit as possible, and important fruit like bananas. It's got potassium and that sort of thing. You get very thirsty, so you really have to drink a lot. And a lot of people say don't take dairy, and other people say do. So I think that's a personal choice. But I drink a lot of water since I've had this. I think steroids and methotrexate give you a huge thirst. Yes, vegetables. Lean meat. We eat a lot of chicken now. We tend not to eat red meat, although I think red meat with polymyalgia is okay if you're a red meat fan in moderation. But I prefer to eat organic foods as well, so they haven't got those hormones in them. It's more expensive, obviously, so not everyone can afford to go organic, but it is preferable to do that. And the other thing is things like bone broth. I had to get special bone broth from a farm near Oxford. They sent it up quite regularly to me, and that's also been quite good. Or you can make your own at home. It just takes a longer time. But Kate does speak about that in her book. And there is another book, I can't remember the name, unfortunately, but it's called The Autoimmune Protocol. And that talks a lot about anti-inflammatory diets. But I don't think there's been enough on it. I think a lot of people there hasn't been as much research as there should have been on anti-inflammatory diets. I don't think, not scientific research, maybe just personal, private people doing some research, trial and error and all that sort of thing. But Sherry, I want to mention one thing when you were talking about diabetes. I forgot to say that taking steroids, there are risks to getting diabetes more easily and osteoporosis. So when you take the medication that you're on, you have to take a vitamin D and calcium supplement at the same time. And with methotrexate in England, you have to go for a blood test every 2 weeks because you have to check that your liver and kidney are not being compromised by the drugs. So to me, at first, when I heard the word diabetes, I thought, oh, I must watch my sugar levels, obviously. And osteoporosis, obviously you need to do a lot more exercise. And I, in my opinion, eat more dairy. So, I haven't given up dairy. Because I think I'm worried about the lack of calcium in my bodies. And here, I don't know in South Africa, but here they do lots of tests to check your susceptibility to osteoporosis and diabetes. So I'm getting checked quite regularly and having to go to the doctor quite a lot and to the rheumatologist a couple of times a year.
Sure. So I think just to the final question, Joe, is if, as I was mentioning to a friend of ours who's just recently been diagnosed with polymyalgia, if you had to give him a little bit of advice, it's obviously different from what we've spoken about here. He obviously will follow all of those things, but just in a sentence or two, what advice would you give someone who's recently diagnosed?
Read the book, join a support group, eat healthily, and rest as much as you can.
Okay. So,
and of course, a little bit of exercise. Rather than doing 1 hour here, 4 lots of 12 minutes a week or 4 lots of 15 minutes a week is quite adequate. And it has to be different forms of exercise like movement, resistance exercise, a little bit of cardiovascular. Swimming and walking are particularly suggested for polymyalgia rheumatica, so as to keep your body moving as much as possible.
So, Joe, well, thank you so much for giving of your time, but also giving of your personal experience. And
it's a
for
pleasure.
the viewers who are listening, whether you're listening live or the rebroadcasts, if you have any tips or ideas about what people suffering from polymyalgia rheumatica can do, please feel free to write it in the comment box below. We need to be starting to having the conversations, the difficult conversations about these invisible illnesses. And so, Joe, we wish you well, and we hope that you can get into remission if one can for polymyalgia.
Yes, thank you, Terry.
And thank you again for your time.
Okay, bless you. Thanks, Sherry. Bye.